Good evening, everybody. Today we have a question and answer session. So I believe some questions have been sent in.
There are some questions. Dear Lumpur, due to the lockdown and restrictions in Victoria, many of the lay followers are not able to offer Dhana to the Sangha. May I ask, what is the next best way that a lay follower can do to offer Dhana to the Sangha?
Well, obviously at this time, and particularly in Melbourne, we're under lockdown, so some of the normal conditions and normal ways of doing things here and indeed all around the world have changed a little bit at the moment. And Dhana starts with the intention to support Sangha. One has a belief and maybe even a deeper understanding than that the support of the Sangha with material things is a valuable thing for oneself and for others. It's worth doing. One has that wish and that intention. So that leads on to effort to put that intention into action. So if, say, at the moment it's difficult to actually physically come to the monastery because of lockdown and the limitations on travel and so on, to put that intention into action, one might have to be a bit creative. So there are other ways to materially support Sangha at the moment. You can prepare some food and give it to a friend who is coming to the monastery, because we do have a Dhana roster. Every day somebody is coming. Or other requisites you could pass to your friend to offer on your behalf. You could mail them or courier them to the monastery. Or you could make a financial donation, which maybe is convenient at a time like this, where you do an online transfer to the monastery to support the building and running and operation of the monastery. When I was a layman, I used to send envelopes to Wat Panana Chat in Thailand, where I had been in Anagarika in the period prior to returning to Thailand to train to become a monk. And so in that period of about 8 months, I regularly sent envelopes with pound notes wrapped in paper, sent them to Thailand. And I believe they got through because I wasn't able to physically go and support the monastery there. So you can be creative in your dana, or you just wait. If your intention is strong, then you're patient, well, at some point the conditions will change and you will be able to attend here or some other Buddhist monastery or place where you want to offer dana. So you can be patient and you just keep that intention in the back of your mind ready for the right conditions. But what we've been talking about here is Amisa Bucha, the practice and the veneration of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha through material offerings, and then the material support of the Sangha, which is important, of course, because a monastery does need support. It's totally based on dana, generosity, charity, the sacrifice of not only the Sangha but the laity who support the Sangha. So take our monastery, for example, every last thing from the land to the buildings to the furnishings, the food, everything has been offered freely by Buddhists with faith and interest to support this. There's no commercial activity taking place. So it is an important thing to offer dana, and it tends to draw you close to the Sangha. Physically closer and mentally closer to the Sangha, maybe even is setting up conditions for you yourself. One day you might want to join the Sangha, if only temporary, on 8 precepts, stay in the monastery temporarily, on a retreat, or for a period of time, or maybe even take the step towards ordination. And the practice of Dhana is one thing that leads on to that and supports that. So it is an important thing in our practice. The other part of the practice is the practice itself, the way we kind of offer our time and energy and life to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha is through the practice. So if we're not in a position to make a material offering, we can offer our practice to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. So what you hear, what you're encouraged to do in your practice, you go away and you put it into practice. So even if you can't get to a monastery to offer Dhana during lockdown, you can still keep the precepts. You can still meditate every day, listen to the Dhamma, reflect on the Dhamma, try to develop wholesome karma, skillful action in your daily life. And that is also just as valuable. There's also other ways we can offer Dhana. In society, if we can't go to the monastery, we can practice Dhana with maybe some local charity or something that's closer to home that we can still support in one way or another. Helping the sick, the homeless, whatever we may do, or just charity at home and Dhana at home. So help your parents, help the elder or members of your family who are sick, help your kids. If you have kids, whoever's around you, you can practice Dhana with the people around you. You may have the intention to support Sangha, but if you can't put that into practice yet, well, practice Dhana with those people you can. It's always beneficial to help your parents. So if they're still alive, see what you can do for them, what help they need in one way or another. So this is how we practice. We practice on the level of material support, and that is important, and then the level of the practice itself as a way of Dhana. We live in the monastery as monks. We don't have any material income, so we can't offer Dhana, but we offer Dhana through giving the Dhamma teachings and advice and support. We offer Dhana in the sense we look after the place for ourselves, but for everyone else. So monks generally try to live in a frugal, economic way, not waste the resources of the Sangha, not waste the donations of the laity. We try and make the best use of them that we can. So monks live very simply. Most of the kutis in the monastery don't take much in terms of running costs. They just have a pit toilet, solar power. Water is actually free. Our water supply is supplied by Melbourne Water. It's free. We do have to filter it ourselves, but the actual cost of the water is nothing because they don't filter it for us. We have many wood fires, wood stoves in the monastery, so we collect firewood and use that. So we do what we can to keep costs down. We do our own cleaning. So you come to the monastery, the toilets have been cleaned by the laity or the lay people in the monastery or the monks. The buildings are cleaned and maintained by the Sangha. The rubbish is removed by the Sangha from the floor where it's fallen or into the bins. We do have to pay some funds towards rubbish removal. So there are some basic running costs of the monastery that you can always contribute to, and you can always do that through an online donation. So there's plenty of scope if you're creative and you want to put your intention into practice, whether it's in your own practice of Dhana or just in your general practice. You can make all of that as an offering to the Sangha, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha.
The next question is, Dear Lumpur, what should we look for in a spiritual teacher that guides us in our spiritual practice? What is the right way to approach such teacher?
Well, these days we're living in a world of many teachers, especially with the development of technology. so many teachers and teachings are available online. Teachers in person are important, of course, though. And so a teacher you can actually go and visit and ask questions from, see, practice with would be important. Books and even online teachings in the form of just talks and whatever is available online, it's good up to a point, but you also need a living teacher. The best teachers are the noble ones, and that's who the Buddha encouraged us to seek out the noble ones. You're not always going to know who is a noble one, so sometimes you just have to go on instinct. It's not always 100% reliable, people can get it wrong, but that's one thing. When you meet a teacher, do you feel comfortable? Do you feel happy? Do you feel at ease in the presence of that teacher? Just a feeling. Then, of course, what the teacher says. Do they say things that make sense, that are wise, that are encouraging you in the direction to put the Buddhist teachings into practice and giving you both encouragement and advice, but also being able to help you when you have obstacles or problems, to give you advice that will help you to get through your problems. You still have to do the practice, but a teacher can be like a shortcut, and they can point out dangers and obstacles and give you advice how to avoid obstacles, or at least how to get through them. And the Buddha said, for a teacher you have to get to know them. Usually it takes time. So you may have a good feeling about a teacher, but then you also have to associate with them. You spend time with them, not necessarily every day of your life, but you keep coming into contact with them, meeting them, seeing them, hearing the Dhamma from them. And a good teacher has certain qualities. Like the Buddha says, they have to be a good example. And they have to be somebody who is friendly, so you feel you're able to approach them, receive teaching from them, be in their presence. They're somebody who is a good example in themselves, so they talk and they walk the talk as much as they can. They're not just telling you what to do, but they don't do it themselves. So they're somebody who is honest and practices what they teach. And then they have patience with you as a person, because you're coming from a place of being new to Buddhism or a newcomer. If the teacher is too critical and got no time for your weaknesses, your kilesas, well, that's not much use, is it? So the teacher has to be patient. They have to be able to listen to you, to get to know you. They have to be able to give you the appropriate advice, which is always advice leading and supporting you in the practice, rather than leading you off in the wrong direction, giving you wrong views or telling you to do things that are going to lead to your suffering. Another quality the Buddha said for a teacher, they have to be able to explain the Dhamma to you right up to the highest level, or the highest level that they have understood and attained at least. So obviously the best teacher is an arahant, but you might not meet one, or you might not know that you've met one or know of one. But just see this teacher you have encountered, how well do they explain the Dhamma to you? Do you find it helpful and beneficial to listen to their explanations? And a good teacher is one who always knows more than you do, because then whatever question you have, they tend to have more experience in the practice. They've gone a bit further, they've penetrated the Dhamma a little bit more than you, so then they can give you something that helps you along in your practice. Having said that, some people become teachers to us for a period of time in our life, and they may not be our lifelong teacher, but many people are teachers to us at a time when we need them. In a sense, like many people, myself included, you begin the practice of meditation, you go to a meditation center or a place where it's taught, and that teacher may have a certain level of practice and understanding, and at that time they're your best teacher, and they may well give you a lot of good information and encouragement and support in your practice up to a point. And then maybe your practice reaches a a point in your development when you feel you need something more, and that's quite common. So, for example, many people practice with a lay Buddhist teacher to begin with, teaching a lay Buddhist meditation group, or even online. And then they seek out someone else who's maybe practiced a bit and understood a bit more. So often that means they might move to a teacher who's in the Sangha. Not to say that there aren't very accomplished lay teachers either, but often people who are in the Sangha have made more of a commitment to the practice. So monks and nuns, and especially those who have lived a long time in the robes, will have a certain experience that is very hard to gain from the lay life. They have, coming from that commitment, the discipline they keep, generally they keep a very high standard of discipline. They've had time to dedicate to the practice, so they've had time to meditate, to contemplate, to train their mind. So as a combination of these different factors, which may not be immediately apparent when you meet a teacher, but over time they start to come clear to you, and they might confirm what you already feel. Maybe you just had a feeling to start with, and later you come to understand that, oh, that was true, that feeling is true. So like many people had this experience with Ajahn Chah. When I went to Thailand, he'd already stopped speaking. The year I went to Thailand, he'd stopped speaking. Luckily, his taped talks and written talks were still available, and many of his closest supporters, disciples, were still there. But he was still there, still alive, and I felt his presence, the energy and the atmosphere around him was something very special. So even though I wasn't conversing with him, asking questions from him, I still found it very beneficial to be with Ajahn Chah in the early years. And then other teachers, if they actually speak to you as well, that's even better. But often it's just a feeling, and you move on from that, and then with more practice, your own questions come up. Often they're answered by the teacher, often indirectly, and the teacher is talking to someone else or explaining something generally, and that's the question you have in your mind, and they answer it for you. Or you answer your own question, but the encouragement and the special presence of the teacher just sort of facilitates that and supports that. So you have to get to know a teacher over time. Best of all is just commit everything to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. If you're ready, quit the lay life, become a monk or a nun, find a good teacher and just settle down, get into the practice and reach enlightenment. That would be the best, I would say. Of course, some people do have unfortunate experiences with teachers. It can happen. Sometimes you find someone initially, they teach you well and it goes well, and then later on you find that maybe they don't keep the precepts, or they're deluded in some way, have wrong views. It does happen occasionally. So you have to accept that fact that teachers are still human. If they're not a fully enlightened being, then they may also have their faults and weaknesses. And if that happens, then you have to separate between the teacher and the Dhamma. And the Dhamma that makes someone enlightened is impersonal. It's not a personality. These are qualities that you're developing and cultivating within yourself. And a teacher may embody them, or it may turn out they don't fully embody those qualities. Maybe the teacher turns out to not be quite what you thought. But that doesn't change the path of practice. The Dhamma is still good, and you just have to accept some humans, they're not what you think they are on the outside, because sometimes we're very idealistic and blinded by our idealism. So don't get too disappointed if a teacher turns out to be mistaken or show their weaknesses, their faults. You just have to accept that's part of the human experience. It's nothing new, and no doubt there'll be a few more of those kind of situations in the future, but just accept it rather than taking it very personally and putting you off Dhamma practice altogether, because that would be a shame, wouldn't it? So maybe that's enough for now on that.
Dear Lumpur, is it possible to not be able to recognize our defilements even when we practice precepts and do regular meditation? If so, what can we do to be more aware of them?
Oh, similar to the last question. A good way to go is to have a good teacher, because a teacher can help you see defilements, a bit like a mirror, especially in the beginning of your practice. But then develop right view. And part of right view is just understanding the impermanent nature of our body and mind, our views on the Dhamma, the knowledge we get from the Dhamma, the states of peace we get from practicing meditation, even the precepts we keep, the intention to keep precepts. All these things are still impermanent until the mind has kind of merged with the Dhamma and the path factors have become established. Say one becomes a noble one. Until that state, there's always a chance for the unexpected, or for change, or for delusions to creep into our thinking. And delusion is deluding. Yeah. The deepest cause, the base cause of all our suffering as humans is avijja, which means not knowing, or ignorance. Only the anagami, the once returner, the person who's just about to become an arahant, finally abandons all ignorance and not knowing. So there's always going to be a little bit lurking in the background of your practice, and the whole point about delusion is it's deluding, so you don't see it at the time, maybe when it's arising or taking place in your thinking, your view, the way you're looking at experience. You may be deluded. And someone asked Ajahn Chah once, they said, "Oh, delusion, it's so frustrating because when it's overwhelming your mind, you don't see it, you don't know it. Where is it? How can we know delusion?" He said, "Oh, you're like someone riding on a horse asking where the horse is. It's there all the time, and that is part of our practice, is learning how to manage that fact, the fact that we are being conditioned by delusion as we practice. Very frustrating thing, but you can develop certain qualities that help protect you. So like the Buddha said the most valuable quality, if you encompass all the Buddhist path into one quality, is apamada, is heedfulness, being heedful. That means with everything you experience and everything that's going on in your practice. So at every level we have to practice heedfulness, and in particular develop mindful awareness of what we're doing and what's going on. Because with mindfulness, our wisdom and intelligence can function well when we're mindful. And so, one kind of caution that Luang Por Chah always gave us is that everything is not sure. So maybe you practice Dhana and you're feeling very happy with your Dhana practice, your practice of generosity, and you may feel, "Oh, I'm very unattached, I can practice Dhana," but it's not sure. Maybe one day a situation will arise where you see some clinging, that you don't want to share or give something away, or you don't want to practice forgiveness, letting go of your anger with someone. It's another form of Dhana. When the situation is right, maybe it comes up that you suddenly recognize a kilesa that you didn't see before. It was there, but you didn't see it. Same with precepts. You keep the precepts, you may form a conceit, a self-view around that. So you are keeping the precepts, and every day you're trying to do that well and diligently, but then at the same time you're developing a conceit that I keep the precepts, I'm virtuous, I am pure, whatever. And then that may lead you to feel superior compared to someone else, or they don't keep the precepts as well as me, or they don't keep as many precepts as me, and so on. Delusion is like this. Delusion will manifest often as a sense of self, a conceit of I. Even in the Dhamma practice we do, even in the good we do, we can form a sense of self and attachment to that. And it often leads us to be looking at other people critically sometimes, or in awe of others. I'm so hopeless, they're so good at their meditation, they're so good at their keeping the precepts, I'm so bad. And we get caught into depression, disappointment with ourselves. It can go both ways. But the self-view is particularly a kilesa, a mental defilement that slips into our experience even as we're practicing. The same with meditation. You meditate and you have a really peaceful meditation one day, you put a lot of effort in, and you might have lots of joy, piti and sukha arise, and you finish that meditation and you feel, oh, I had a good meditation, I am good. And then, somebody else comes along and says something and suddenly that all crumbles because maybe it was just a very temporary state. It crumbles and you can fall into anger or worry and fear or anything. It can slip into your experience quite quickly. So we always need mindfulness. Before you meditate, you practice mindfulness. During your meditation, you practice. After your meditation, you practice it. And mindfulness keeps you prepared and allows your wisdom faculty to also function. So one of the main reflections on meditation practice, and particularly states of calm that you achieve, is that you're aware they're impermanent and they're not yet enlightenment. They're certainly a part of the path and they're very beneficial to experience and develop. But Ajahn Chah used to say, the peace of meditation, the states of calm is like a rock on grass. As long as the rock is placed on the grass dies off and is flattened underneath. When you lift the rock off, the grass springs back up. States of happiness, calm, samadhi that we attain in our meditation, they temporarily suppress our mental defilements of greed, anger, delusion. But when you come out of that state, or that state disappears, degenerates, all the kilesas can re-emerge just as before, but you may have a new delusion, an extra delusion you didn't have before. You might have a delusion that, I am somebody who can attain samadhi, I'm peaceful, I have more samadhi than other people, or I am somehow good because of my samadhi. So then if something comes up in your experience, like you have experienced some anger or irritation or some greed or lust, it doesn't fit with that delusion that you've developed. So then you might kind of push it to one side or deny it or hide it or get overwhelmed by the kilesa when it comes up because you weren't prepared for it. So we need to practice mindfulness at every step in our practice on the level of Dhana, Sila, Bhavana, contemplate the impermanent nature of states of mind, be prepared by reflecting on the impermanence, on the dukkha, on the not self, not clinging with a sense of self to the good and the bad, to the good experiences we gain through our practice or the bad. We have to be on our toes, contemplate. They say, like one teacher used to say, kilesas, these mental defilements, wrong thinking rooted in delusion, that manifests as greed, anger, delusion, is a bit like the various chemicals and component parts of a match you use to strike to make fire. And the match head contains all kinds of chemicals. But normally a match sitting in a box is not doing anything to anybody, it's just sitting there, so it's benign, it's not a problem, and you don't realize maybe even what the danger is or what the potential is. And kilesas are like that. Much of the time they're just sitting in our mind, not bothering anyone, kind of behind the scenes, under the surface. You may even think they no longer exist in your experience. But like the match, if you do take the match out of the box and you have a rough surface, you strike it on that rough surface, you get a spark, you get light, fire. And then you can take that match that's lit, you could just put it on the ground, it goes out quickly, but you could take it and light something, so you could start a whole forest fire from one match, a bushfire, or that big explosion in Beirut the other day, that must have been started, they say it was accidental. I don't know all the details, but there must have been a spark from something, maybe a cigarette or a match or something, started a small fire first, which then became a bigger fire, and then I think fireworks were being stored next to all that ammonium nitrate. So in one warehouse there were fireworks, so that went up first, from a small fire to a bigger fire, and then all this these chemicals, which were very highly volatile, explosive chemicals, they all went up on a later explosion, and you see the picture of the huge mushroom cloud. They say it's the biggest explosion outside the atom bomb of Hiroshima, which actually we also it's come up to the anniversary of that. A strange coincidence. Anyway, the thing is, it's all started from just one spark. Kilesas are like that. They're lying latent in your consciousness. One spark, the right conditions, and they can come out. So they say one moment of anger can destroy a lifetime of goodness. And kilesas, mental defilements, can pop up, be triggered, even after you've done a lot of good. So you have to practice heedfulness, mindfulness as well. So you might have a very peaceful meditation, and people do this. They get peaceful. They say, my samadhi was good today. And then they finish their meditation, they're very pleased with themselves, and then they walk off, and they see someone doing something that they shouldn't, and straight away they're back into an angry or critical mood, and all the samadhi disappears. It can be like that. Our kilesas can come up very quickly, they can overwhelm us, they can sneak up on us, they can come up when we're not expecting. So this is why Ajahn Chah said, it's not sure. If you see a fault or a kilesa in someone else, well, come back to yourself. Maybe I have that. Don't waste too much time thinking about other people. Put your attention on yourself. If you're feeling very pleased with yourself, with your practice, I've got no anger, no greed, it's not sure. Maybe the conditions just haven't arisen to test you or tempt you. So if you use this reflection, it's not sure, that helps you to deal with the conceit that may come up that might make you blind to certain of your kilesas that you haven't noticed yet. They're hiding, or that your delusion is hiding them. So use that. It's not sure, it's uncertain, it's impermanent, and be on your guard. One match can start a whole forest fire or a whole explosion.
Dear Lord Paul, how do we deal with fear of death?
Fear of death, was that? Sorry? Fear of death? Well, it's something we all have. Why do I say that? Well, because we all were born. And why were we born? Because we wanted to be born. The power of our past karma from our past life brought us to be born in this life. So we're born and we immediately start life with some attachment, clinging to this body and mind and feelings. Even as a baby, a sense of self starts to arise. And so when you get clinging, then there's the potential for fear, because you cling to this body, so you get fear of anything that could harm you. So some of the fear will be subtle, just fear of what other people will say, reputation, or fear of unpleasant experiences that might not be life-threatening, but they're just unpleasant and you don't want them. Or you get the deeper fear, the actual fear for your life. So, at the moment, some people are afraid they get coronavirus, or they're afraid, some people are afraid when they get in a car, or they're afraid, might be afraid, a monk might be afraid when it's stormy, and they might be afraid a tree will fall on their head, or they meet a tiger snake in the forest and might be afraid. And a lot of fear is coming out of just awareness of danger. So what do we do with fear? Well, we have to, again, come back to the practice of mindfulness and then try to wisely reflect on it. And there's different approaches depending on the kind of fear and how it's coming up. So one approach is just to get more information, because a lot of our fear is irrational, or it's not really based on any real immediate threat. It's just potential threats and fear about what may happen. So when you confront it and bring up wise reflection, you might, you say you're afraid of the dark, fear arises. So that's a genuine feeling, you're feeling it, it's there. So first thing you might establish mindfulness, and then you ask yourself questions, what am I afraid of? maybe you can't even answer because it's just a kind of general fear of the dark. You say, well, is there anything in the dark that's a threat to me? If you can turn on a light, well, that may solve the problem straight away. You just realize, oh, nothing's there. Or you could say, well, I've been in the dark so many times in my lifetime and nothing ever happened, so maybe I don't need to be afraid now. These are just examples where you get more information, or you teach yourself that perhaps your fear is unnecessary, and you're facing it and you have to be patient with the feeling, but you are teaching yourself till you may be able to gradually let go of that fear, and it might gradually reduce and diminish from your experience. So confronting fear, learning about it, both with mindfulness of the feeling coming with it, and then considering the whole situation, you might be able to address it that way. Of course, as you get older in life, or if you are getting sick or there's some immediate threat, well, maybe the fear has come up very strongly, and maybe whatever you say is not going to disappear very easily because you may be at the end of your life or in a life-threatening situation. So in that case, you have to practice patience, bring up the mindfulness, and do your best to maintain your mindfulness so your mind is not conditioning the fear, making it worse, building it into something more than it is. Because it inevitably begins as a feeling. Fear you usually feel in your heart, it sort of spreads out from there, and you feel more tense, and you get physical reactions, mental reactions, and then mental proliferation. But the more you can be mindful of that, the more you can keep it in check. And maybe at first you can't stop the feeling arising, fear of imminent death or fear of something that's going to happen, but you just keep it in check and not let it overwhelm your mind, take your thoughts off, or building a big story out of it, or creating something more than it is. Then also you can use other skillful qualities to come in and help yourself at that time when the fear has arisen. You may be mindful enough to know, I'm afraid, this is what it's like as a feeling. And you turn your mind to something better to help assuage, to reduce that feeling at that time. So the Buddha always said, if you're afraid and you don't know what to do, think of the Buddha. If you have some faith in the Buddha, just thinking the qualities of the Buddha, the peace, the wisdom, the compassion of the Buddha, already just recollecting the Buddha can steady your mind at that time, calm you down. And that's why people often, when they're afraid, they'll chant or recite verses, or just the one meditation word, Buddho. People have used this so many times to deal with fear, to bring up mindfulness, steady their mind, and they're undermining the very fear, the basis of fear in their mind, till the fear actually disappears. And I've done this myself. When you meet wild animals in the forest, or you're in a situation where you're confronted by someone who's very angry or threatening, you can recite Buddho silently to yourself, maintain your mindfulness, and you may not be able to get rid of the situation, but you can keep your mind calm in that situation and reduce the thoughts based on fear, and even the feeling of fear can dissipate quickly. If it's like imminent death, say you've got terminal illness, people I found have practiced very well with this, developing mindfulness, maybe developing metta bhavana, focusing their mind on the thought of loving kindness for themselves, for others, as a constant meditation through their illness, maybe right to the end of their life. And the Buddha taught us that we can practice what he taught. As long as we're conscious, we can practice to the very last breath of our life. We can practice mindfulness. We can bring up the thought of kindness. We can contemplate impermanence, let go of the body, let go of our worries, let go of feelings. We can do that. So any method that you've developed, and start when you're not afraid, start when you're in situations where you're not afraid, develop your mindfulness, develop your meditation practice, so that when a fearful situation arises, you've got something there you can turn to. And that's one of the values of meditation. If you practice meditation regularly through your life, well, when the time comes, you have something you can turn to help cope with, undermine, reduce the fearful feelings and thoughts, and maybe even completely abandon them from your mind.
Next question is the last tonight. Dear Lumpur, form to be self, self as possessing form, form as in self, self in form. What is the meaning of this statement? What is the scope it covers?
Form is to be self, self-possessing form. Well, there are different manifestations of the view of self, I think, what you might call Sakkaya Ditthi, which is the first of the fetters which binds us to this world and to particularly attachment to this body, identifying with the body in one way or other, feeling that the body is within me or I'm within the body, and the different permutations. The Buddha was very good at going through the different views and wrong views that people have in the world, and he's very thorough, so he put them down. If you read the suttas, it sounds like this is a quote from a sutta. You can see the amazing clarity, the analytical mind of the Buddha, the clarity in just putting out different views of self and the way we look at things. But in essence, you're taking form, matter, as self. So this body is made up of the four main elements: earth, air, fire and water. And the Buddha's explanation of what we do through delusion and why we have fear, for example, is because we take possession of these four elements which have come together in nature, and we eat food and drink and breathe air, and so the body keeps going through our life until something goes wrong and we die. But while we're alive, these four elements are working together. Sometimes they're not working very well, so we get sickness and problems. But they're working together, combining together to make this body go. And we form a view. The mind, is looking for this body as a sort of a means, like a vehicle to do all kinds of things in the world. If we've got a body, can travel. We can eat things and taste nice food. We can see things. We can hear things. We can go about our business based on having this body. And this sense of self, then, like the driver of the vehicle says, this is me, this is mine. But this also is promoting ignorance and delusion. If we don't question and investigate this, we just take it for granted. Body is me, it's myself. And you may, have a sort of variations on that. The body is within me, I'm within this. I have a soul or some kind of eternal self, and I'm just picking up one body this lifetime and then dropping it and picking up again next life. There's variations, but it's all based on this unquestioned and unobserved attachment to the body as self in one way or another. When in fact it's these four elements that have come together, and at the end of the life they go apart, they break apart. And it's not to say that there's nothing there. It's not like the Buddha is saying, there's nothing there. The convention of having a self is quite useful, and we use it in many parts of our life, and in the Buddhist practice we can use the convention of self, the sense of there's me doing good, keeping precepts, practicing Dhana, meditating, where you can use that sense of self. But on the deeper level, when you're investigating with mindfulness, you're asking questions, is there any permanent lasting self in this, or is these four elements that make up the body, are they within the self? Is the self outside of it? Is it within it? You're looking at different angles and using the reflection on the three characteristics as like a tool to kind of ease up your rigid and fixed views about things that you may have received from teachers or other people or reading, or maybe it's just your own thinking. But as humans, we tend to get caught into fixed, rigid views about things. So in Vipassana meditation, you're contemplating that, and you're sort of getting under the surface and saying, is it what I think, is it true? And you ask questions, is form permanent or impermanent? Is this body permanent, impermanent? Feelings as well, feelings based on this body, sensations, sense consciousness that arises, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching. Is it permanent or impermanent? And you come to the conclusion, it's impermanent, changing, subject to change. What is subject to change? Is it happiness or is it painful? Is it satisfactory or unsatisfactory? It's unsatisfactory, it's constantly changing. Our body is constantly changing, so we get some pain and difficulties with it, and we're constantly having to look after it. And it's a bit of a lost cause because it's always getting older and wearing out, and eventually it dies. So it's dukkha. And then what is impermanent? Is it a self? Can you say it's a self? You can say, well, there's something here, so it's not like there's nothing here, but a self, the usual way of looking at a self is meaning it's something that is lasting, permanent, that you can control. So if your body is a self, well, yourself wouldn't want a body that is dukkha. You'd want a body that is perfect, never brings you pain, lasts forever. And that's what, the sort of the materialist view of things is very much like that. Hire the company in California to freeze you when you die, and then in 200 years when the technology is ready, they'll unfreeze you and get you out again. Same body, just keep you going forever. That's our desire, isn't it? Or maybe with artificial intelligence, develop the robot that becomes your robot, and you take your genes or your DNA and you put it into the robot, so you do lose your body, but you keep some of it in the robot and keep going forever. That's what the sense of self does. It always wants that. But when you see self-identity with this body, you have to say, why are you identifying with something that is a process of arising and ceasing and change and is destined to die and break up? That's not a self, and a self wouldn't do that if there was such a thing as a permanent, eternal self. But these are things you have to question. So the Buddha was encouraging us to develop our mindfulness and question our experience, and start with this body. It's a very good place to start. So a big part of the practice, maybe more than I can talk about tonight, but question the views you have around your body and what you see as self. Investigate not self, anatta. It's a very useful tool for exposing some of our views and our misinterpretations of experience and our delusions. So is that the last question? So that's the last question for tonight. So thank you for your questions. If I've said anything useful, take it away. I hope it can support you in your practice. If it wasn't useful, you can just leave it right here. And we wish you good health and safety, and may the blessings of the Triple Gem guide you, protect you.